The Baroness' first move was to send their scouts to reconnoiter the town again. Given the expedition's overwhelming strength relative to the town's visible defenders, Pandora's actor questioned the necessity of such an act. Lady Zaradnik's undead state made her thoughts unknowable to him, however, so he settled in to wait alongside their imperial guests to see what she was up to. Momen. Miss Erix waved her hand. Where's your partner, the beautiful princesses, Nobe? The thoughts of the three wizards perked up at the mention of Nabril. If he recalled correctly, his master had experienced the same difference in treatment in the Empire, where Fluda Paradine showed absolutely no interest in the Dark Warrior until he gave him a glimpse of his arcane prowess. In the capital, Pandora's actor replied. Adventurers in the Sorceress Kingdom no longer exist as they do elsewhere. Our members are true professionals who can be formed into any combination of individuals depending on our needs. The senior staff are usually busy overseeing training and instruction. But didn't you come here as a couple from elsewhere? A couple? He held back a sigh at the flower garden blooming in Miss Erix's thoughts. He supposed that it couldn't be helped that people thought of their relationship that way, but it always mentally threw him off. Ironically, Nobe's faceless state in the young woman's imagination put her closer to the truth than most. While it's true that we arrived together, Pandora's actor said, we only became an adventurer team because it helped us move around in this region of the world. Our private interests are served better with the current arrangement. What part of the world did you come from? Far to the south. Did you come by way of the theocracy or by ship through the Holy Kingdom? That's a good question. No one seemed to care about Momen and Nobe's origins aside from the fact that they were outsiders. As a result, he didn't have a concrete answer to the question. Miss Erix was reportedly an ambitious officer aiming for a high position in the Imperial Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so she was potentially a source of valuable information on the outside world. Let's see what we can get out of her. We traveled through the theocracy, he replied. I wasn't aware of that, Lady Zaradnik said. What route did you take? Pandora's actor froze at the unexpected ambush. It seemed that he wasn't the only hunter present. He made a show of recollecting the journey as he desperately fished the Imperial Trio's thoughts for information. Let's see, after crossing the desert from the Koshi Belt, we came northwest through the savannah on the margins of Avasha. Their Imperial guest seemed satisfied that his account matched their knowledge. Lady Zaradnik was a complete blank as she nodded at his words. I wasn't aware that such a route existed. Me neither. Was there a particular reason that you asked? My people are from beyond the theocracy, Lady Zaradnik answered. Both my great-grandfather and my mother. Rumor has it that Gazif Strinov was from the south, as well. Are you and Nobe from the Koshi Belt or a country even further south? No, Zaradnik, the scouts are back. Pandora's actor breathed a silent sigh of relief as he was saved by the returning scouts. The existence of the Koshi Belt was the limit of Dimir Erix's knowledge of the south. He would have to conduct some research before the topic was brought up again. Then joined the adventurers, who were gathered around a large sheet of paper unfurled over a flat boulder. One of the rangers was penning out the details of the town. Like the town's wall, even the largest structures were little more than piles of broken stone scattered across the landscape. How? Lady Zaradnik said, you mentioned a mare. Where is it? Should be this building. The rogue gestured to a large building adjacent to the central plaza. What is the town hall's staff composed of? Is there an archive or anything similar filled with skeleton mages? The skeleton mages are in other buildings. The clerks in the town hall are wraiths and ghasts. Couldn't get a solid count. Any sign of underground passages? Cellars or basements? The one for the town hall looks like it's filled in. All right. What about casters? Where are they? The scouts took turns reporting the locations of several skeleton mages. Lady Zaradnik took a step back from the map once they were done. These two buildings look like temples. She pointed to two other buildings on the plaza. These other buildings with one or two skeleton mages might be shops, alchemists and such. What about this clearing? A druid grove, going by how the vegetation is arranged. Why are skeleton mages getting swapped in for divine casters? I'm not exactly sure, Lady Zaradnik said. His Majesty the Sorcerer King has theorized that there isn't a suitable conceptual analogue for divine casters at this difficulty rating in our region. What? The right type of undead to swap in. Stop sleeping through my lectures. But they're perfect for naps. Lady Zaradnik sighed as light laughter rippled through the assembled adventurers. Viscount Brennanthal raised his hand. I would appreciate it if you elaborated on this subject, he said. It doesn't sound like anything I've heard before. It has to do with what I mentioned before about negative energy zones reflecting what once existed where they stood, Lady Zaradnik said. The details are quite interesting. What undead manifest in any given spot depends on factors such as the biome they're situated in and what civilization and race occupied the area before. That's why we tend to see the same types of undead across this region. Even the equipment that the undead spawn with is reliant on what came before. In other words, you could say that there is a conceptual pool of forms that can manifest based on the combination of the above factors. Once enough ambient negative energy has collected in an area, it will coalesce into a form available for selection. So far, this is consistent in our observations of undead-producing areas in the Sorceress Kingdom below a certain threshold. What happens above that threshold? A sufficiently advanced negative energy ecology will begin manifesting aberrant forms. These are rare, so there isn't much that I can say beyond that. How come we haven't noted this structure before? Countess Waldenstein asked. We actually did, Lady Zaradnik answered, but our framing only has us recognize the smaller patterns within the greater. A sentry at a graveyard has a solid idea of what they'll potentially face. Similarly, we have expectations of what might lurk in an old tomb or what will be present on a border patrol along the Katsa Plains. What we don't see is how undead in our region differ from other regions. What we know is perceived as normal everywhere, but it isn't. The Baroness' briefing continued, thoroughly plotting out their assault on the town. Once she was satisfied that everyone understood how things would roughly play out, they took their positions outside the ruined town's main gate. Watch Captain's cohort, first. At Lady Zaradnik's signal, the rangers started loosing arrows at the gatehouse. The ruin turned into a hive of activity as the nearby undead reacted to the attack. That's a lot more than just the gate, Poole called out. We've got a call to arms. Looks like they're mimicking living reactions. Horst, Cass, you're up. A pair of wizards stepped out in front of the fighters. Despite the rubble of the wall being less than a meter high, the undead sentries rushed to the equally ruined gatehouse to stream out in their hundreds toward them. Arrows continued flying out to take down the leading attackers, slip them up. Grease. Grease. The old path halfway down from the gatehouse immediately took on a slick appearance. Despite Grease being a first-tier spell, even the much higher-level wights lost their footing and fell. A handful managed to stay on their feet, but their movement was significantly slowed. The rangers switched to take down the undead that looked like they could struggle their way through while the pile-up of undead grew. Clean them out. Lightning. Lightning. The twin lightning bolts ripped up the path to the gatehouse, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. A single, frazzled-looking wight appeared to be the only survivor. Hold. Horst, Cass, withdraw. Behind Lady Zaradnik, the rangers lowered their bows. The warriors on the front line eyed the smoking, 3-meter-tall undead demi-human as it stalked toward them. Great White? Or White Lord? I don't even know what kind of demi-human this thing is based on. It's a gnoll, Lady Zaradnik said. It's a bit bigger than a regular gnoll, so it may be a lord. It don't look lordly to me. Someone asked. What are they doing? Miss Eriks whispered. Checking for signs of self-awareness, Pandora's actor told her. There's a somewhat broad range in which intelligent undead may be found. Heinrich walked toward the wight, which looked entirely intent on ripping him limb from limb. Hello? We're adventurers from the Sork. A heavy thunk sounded as the wight slammed its claws against Henrich's heater shield. There's got to be a better way to do this, Henrich grumbled. You need to work on your people skills, Kyla told him. Then we should get a bard to do this. Fuck that. Vincent's voice came from the back. Another thunk sounded from the front line. If you have a brain, please respond. Do the undead even have brains? I think the elder lich's heads are empty. Can someone figure this heap? The wight suddenly lunged, its slavering maw of yellowed fangs reaching over Henrich's shield to bite his pauldron. Henrich's warhammer came across to smash into the wight's extended neck. Its jaws came loose as its head fell and swung loosely from the hinge of its broken spine. Damn it, This damned thing drained me. Or, Themis crooned in sarcastic sympathy, did you get a whittled whiny-wany from the whitey-bitey? The commentary continued as Henrich contended with the non-white. Eventually, the fighter slapped it to the ground with his shield. Can we end this thing already? He asked. I don't know if it's intelligent, but it clearly isn't interested in cooperation. Fine, the Baroness said. Henrich cocked his warhammer. 2 broadhead arrows whizzed in and buried themselves into the hapless white. Henrich spun on his heel as his target disintegrated. I hate you people. Themis raised her hand toward the fighter and cast a spell. Lesser restoration. Reposition at the gate. Scouts, check how much of the town that encounter cleared. The adventurers picked up their packs and made their way up the path. Lady Zaradnik gestured for the Countess party to follow. Do expeditions always go like this? Viscount Brennanthal asked. Things are a lot more orderly with the captain present, Pandora's actor said. We get a fair bit of banter if the situation isn't very threatening. They have a much different approach from the Imperial army. If faced with hundreds of undead, my former captain would have ground them down with an infantry line while keeping the mages in reserve. Mindless opponents are simply that predictable, Lady Zaradnik said. If Captain Germond had the same amount of experience fighting the undead, he would have probably done something similar. It was instructive nonetheless. I still haven't given much thought as to how this new war wizard company will operate on a tactical level. What did the Imperial army have in mind? An Imperial air service wing with more fireballs. Countess Waldenstein snorted. It's pointless going over all of the nuances with the court council or the generals, she said. I had to sell the concept in terms that they could understand. Do we even have 100 spare war wizards lying around? Your primary source of recruits will be seniors from the academy. We needed a clearly defined outlet for those types, anyway. Think of it this way, if you start with a full company, people are going to expect you to do things before you're ready. I suppose. Viscount Brennanthal said, but going by what I've seen of General Ray, he's going to push to get an operational company as quickly as possible. In that case, Countess Waldenstein said, have you considered recruitment posters? I'm sure public affairs can come up with something nice and inspiring. They'd even put your face on it. I'm afraid we'll be swamped with female applicants if I do that. You make it sound as if that's a bad thing, one of the adventurers snarked. Viscount Brennanthal fell silent, but his thoughts seemed to be focused on puzzling out training arrangements if his war wizard company ended up being filled by women. It's worth considering given how rare mages are in general, he said after several moments, but I feel that civilian women joining the Imperial army because of a propaganda poster are going to be in for an unpleasant shock. I can't exactly treat them like regular recruits. The dropout rate for civilian women trying to become Imperial Knights is nearly 100%. How you integrate them into the Imperial army is entirely up to you, isn't it? Countess Waldenstein asked. As far as I know, yes, Viscount Brennanthal said. But I can't have people joining thinking they're going to be the protagonist in a romantic adventure. You give women too little credit, Countess Waldenstein crossed her arms. Viscount Brennanthal rolled his eyes. Don't act as if you haven't seen what public affairs sticks on those posters. They're shameless about planting silly ideas into the heads of both men and women alike. Zaradnik, say something. He's not wrong, Lady Zaradnik said. Wagner snatched one of those standing cutouts of General Ray from a hallway in the academy. It's set up in the solar of her city manor now. In all seriousness, the Baroness continued, establishing an identity for your war wizards and managing the expectations associated with it will be the central challenge. The 6th Army Group learned that lesson the hard way, and General Ray was the only one who tried to prepare his soldiers for what they were getting into. What do you mean by that? The Baroness scanned the town ahead of them before settling into a more comfortable posture. Imperial culture ennobles the protective aspects of martial culture as a consequence of the Empire's history, she said. They threw off the rule of foreign invaders, and the Imperial Knights are honored for their role in maintaining the security and order of the realm. A spirit of service and steadfastness are virtues to be rewarded. But that's a good thing, isn't it? Miss Eriks asked. Whether it's a good thing or not is beside the point. What matters is that the culture of the Empire and the Imperial army revolves around the idea that the Imperial Knights are defenders of the Empire. The Imperial Expeditionary Force doesn't need defenders, it needs conquerors. That comes with an entirely different set of expectations, even a different sense of morality. The Imperial administration may see its military strength as little more than numbers to plug into its formulas, but signing people up to fight the wrong fight will leave you with a legacy of broken veterans. How did General Ray prepare his soldiers? He told them the truth. Showed it to them. General Ray transferred people into his battalion based on their ambitions and aggression. He facilitated that aggression, showing them that they were nothing like the steadfast defenders that the Empire imagined them to be. In fact, they were the antithesis to that concept, the very sort that Imperial citizens are raised to revile and fear. They were violent thieves who would trample anyone who stood in the defense of their homes, stealing their lands and livelihoods. He even called his battalion Ray's Raiders to remind them of what they were. Above all else, he made it clear to his soldiers that the Empire would not understand them. That only those who stood on the same battlefield would ever comprehend what they had become and truly accept them for it. And do you agree with his stance? Viscount Brennanthal asked. It doesn't matter whether I agree or not, the Baroness replied. It just is. Imperial culture may take generations to align with the Empire's new reality. What General Ray is doing is spearheading the required change while seeing to the mental well-being of those under his command. Pandora's actor gauged the reactions to Lady Zaradnik's words. The adventurers were clearly disturbed by the direction that she claimed that the Empire was talking, though he could only consider it progress. A year before, none of them would have batted an eyelash over the idea of demi-humans being victimized by Imperial conquest. Countess Waldenstein and Miss Eriks still mostly thought nothing of it, while Viscount Brennanthal was somewhere in between. As for himself, he wasn't sure whether he could relate. If the forces of Nazarick were ordered to assault a guild base, they would do so without question. A different question arose when he considered his feelings when confronting the NPCs of the target guild base, however. To the NPCs, dying in the defense of Nazarick was considered the pinnacle of service. If so, would the enemy base's defenders be considered the most honorable of foes? Would Nazarick's denizens fight to the utmost of their ability out of respect? Or would some NPCs seek avenues to spare their foes out of that same respect? He could almost tell who would do what. By the same token, analogues to Nazarick's structures were already being made in their new world. Duplicity and disrespect toward Nazarick and its supreme overlord were met with the utmost vehemence when the offenders should have been unworthy of attention either way. Bugs to be squashed, so to speak. Being made to care about the actions and words of what should have been an insect beneath their notice was infuriating for some and surprisingly refreshing for others. I suppose that our culture, too, is evolving. The denizens of Nazarick were tied to the circumstances of their creation, yet this existence that was set in stone could still give rise to emergent behaviors. He found the prospect deeply fearsome and exhilarating at the same time. A few minutes later, the scouts returned, reporting that the wall defense on their side of the town had been obliterated by the adventurers' attack on the gatehouse. We'll strip the town of its patrols, next, Lady Zaradnik said. How far do they come out? There's one that loops between the square and this gatehouse, Poole said. It stops at every intersection, though, so it might take some time to arrive. Will attacking them sound another alarm? Pandora's actor asked. Not that I think we would lose, but we could do without fighting the entire town at once. There's a simple way to find out, the Baroness said. Poole, hit the patrol on this side and lead it out to the side of us. If it comes alone, bring it over, and if it doesn't? I have confidence that you can outrun them. The ranger gave Lady Zaradnik a long look before leaving to carry out her instructions. To everyone's relief, only the patrol came running. Red Skeleton Warrior, variant. One of the rangers frowned. I liked it better when we were fighting human-sized undead. It's too damn annoying to tell what's what here. A tall, big-boned Red Skeleton Warrior chased after Poole with a giant maul, followed by its cohort of a dozen regular skeleton warriors. There were at least 5 different races represented in the patrol. That patrol captain's an ogre, another ranger said. 2 goblins, a gnoll, I don't know what the rest are. The others were human-sized or slightly larger, but their skeletal structures clearly weren't human. Half of them had small tusks that jutted from their lower jaws while the rest had flattened heads. Hobgoblins and orcs, plus 1 bugbear. These things gonna hit any different? Someone asked. Strength according to size. Hobgoblins will be about the same as human skeleton warriors, Loose arrows once pulled out of the way. Actually, pull, take a left. Let's get half of that patrol in here. The ranger abruptly changed direction, allowing the adventurers to loose their shots into the side of the column. Assailed by the new threat, half of the skeleton warriors jerked back to run along their previous course. Match them 1 for 1. Left goblin. Right goblin. You lazy little bugbear. What does an orc skeleton look like? The taller one with the little tusks. Front hob. Back hob. The frontliners closed with their targets after calling them out. Alessia reached hers first, intercepting its axe with her shield. She guided the blade to the side, then stuck out a foot to trip the hobgoblin as its momentum carried it past her. The paladin pivoted and smashed her opponent's ankles in quick succession, then crushed the wrist reaching for its fallen axe with a booted heel. How and another rogue came over to finish off their helpless target. She fights so dirty, is she really a paladin? Pandora's actor chuckled lightly at Miss Erix's thoughts. A strange, empty hiss filled the air. Above. Alessia, defend our guests. Aye, Dominia. A barbed javelin streaked down through the canopy and bounced off of Pandora's actor's armor. A second attack struck Alessia's shield. I love you. Dominia cried, you're the best paladin ever. Aerial patrol, 2 wyvern riders. Pool, get the rest of that patrol in here. Finish them off before our new friends circle back to strafe us again. A storm of magic arrows lit the undergrowth as the adventurers rushed to put the remnants of the patrol down. Pandora's actor peered through the gaps in the canopy, alert for any sign of a renewed aerial assault. Is this truly a mindless response? The question was mirrored in some form by the thoughts of multiple people. It was difficult to think the seemingly coordinated attacks were merely a coincidence. Incoming. Right flank. A dark spot against the clear skies appeared intermittently through the canopy, swiftly making its way toward them. Pandora's actor sprinted across the back of the adventurer front, launching himself through a gap in the branches. A rotting mouth lined with decaying teeth momentarily filled his vision before he rose past it. The same, empty hiss that preceded the first attack filled the air as the undead wyvern twisted its neck to snap at him. Another javelin bounced off of his armor as he leveled out. He landed on the wyvern's back, seizing the white rider by the neck as it reached for another javelin. Its crimson gaze burned with the single-minded hatred of the undead even as Pandora's actor severed it in half and hurled it into the trees below. Now, where's our other flying friend? His mount bucked beneath him as he scanned the surroundings. All that he could see was an endless sea of green and the mountains looming in the east. He spent a few minutes shifting his weight around and trying a few other possible ways to steer his impromptu mount, but nothing seemed to work. A stroke of one of his greatswords separated the undead wyvern's neck from its shoulders. Much to his annoyance, the thing kept flying along, trying to throw him off. A pair of simultaneous slashes removed its wings and he hopped off just before it crashed into the trees. On the forest floor, he found the undead wyvern to be far more resilient than he gave it credit for, or perhaps his attacks struck locations that couldn't take much damage in the first place. The long, dismembered body thrashed blindly about, spraying black viscera from its severed extremities. Pandora's actor ducked under a wild swing of the wyvern's scorpion-like tail before lopping it off and driving his offhand home. At long last, the undead creature collapsed and started to disintegrate. He didn't spare a moment more standing over his vanquished foe, turning on his heel to take several steps before stopping again. His initial intent was to send their aerial attackers crashing down somewhere near the battle in an impressive display of daring-do. Unfortunately, that had proven impossible and he had traveled far further than expected. There was no sign of the town nor any sounds from the ongoing fighting. Now, Pandora's actor said to himself as he eyed the undergrowth around him. Where am I? I think we lost him, Themis said. I think he lost us, Lady Zaradnik replied. Rangobart looked between the two women with a somewhat incredulous look. Was it fine to leave things at that? The aerial ambush barely phased the expedition and the patrol along with its bonus was quickly dispatched. Now, the adventurers were going from building to building, clearing away the undead populating the ruins. With how the adventurers framed things, a part of him couldn't help but imagine that they were systematically butchering the residents of a living town. One of the rogues brought another batch of undead to the expedition, running past the front line. Taylor, wife, and 4 kids, she said. Why a tailor? 'Cause we haven't used it yet. Since most of the ruins were little more than outlines of rubble where buildings once stood, the adventurers passed the time by trying to reason out what everything used to be. Some of them seemed obvious, like the temples and a few of the public buildings, while the rest were loosely categorized into workshop, apartment, and warehouse. Is it fine to leave Moman out there? Lady Waldenstein voiced Rangobart's unasked question. He's the strongest adventurer in the guild, Themis said. He isn't at any risk of being harmed. Why did he do something like that? The adventurers, Alessia said, they like to show off, yes? Especially the veterans from before the new guild. He probably had something impressive in mind, but it didn't work out as intended. Displays of prowess are essential in the old adventuring business, one of the bards, Vincent said. Trying to get by on posted commissions alone is both slow and monotonous. Impressing clients is a good way to spread awareness of one's team and secure personal requests. In Moman's case, he had somehow become famous enough that his first quest as a copper-rank adventurer was a personal request from a well-known alchemist in the city. Did he know the alchemist from before? Dimir asked. I don't think so, Vincent shook his head and shrugged. Heroes are just made of different stuff, I guess. From the way that they fought, the new generation of adventurers tended to keep things uncomplicated despite their constant banter. Rangobart didn't particularly care about how visually impressive they were so long as they could do the work that was advertised in the promotional materials he had received earlier that week. He didn't want to kill the mood or seem insufferable by saying so, however. Ah, Henrich's voice came from the front, this one's got a funny-looking sword. A few people near the fighter turned their heads as he used the head of his warhammer to bind the blade tightly over the rim of his shield. Maybe you're fighting a herbalist, Cass suggested. This is a bit too much to be a harvesting tool, don't you think? Henrich asked. The fighter shoved the white off balance and buried his warhammer in its chest. It crumbled into dust in a matter of seconds, as did its exotic weapon. Damn it, why can't these things drop their stuff? The Katza Plains would be an iron mine if we could. Who decides that? They can kill people just fine with their fake weapons. It wasn't a question Rangobart had ever asked. Most people just accepted such things as a reality of the world. We are clear to the town square, one of the scouts announced. Let's set up on the near side, she said. It doesn't look like there's a market filled with townsfolk or anything like that. The square wasn't anything like a square, either. A circular area roughly 30 meters across was ringed by the remains of the town's largest buildings, containing the remains of several features that he couldn't put any names to. Rangobart scanned the nearest piles of worn, moss-covered rubble, wondering what the place looked like before it was destroyed. I find it hard to believe that one can discern anything from this, he said. It's worn down to practically nothing. We'll have to do some digging around to find better preserved pieces of the place, Lady Zaradnik told him. Considering how widespread the ruins are, this expedition may take many years to complete. Is that a good thing, or a bad thing? It's good in the sense that we'll have plenty of sites for field training, Lady Zaradnik replied. I'd like to have some answers sooner rather than later, though. Despite her impatient statement, the Baroness' voice carried nothing in the way of urgency. Rangobart's experience with her also indicated that she was the furthest thing from impatient. Does it have something to do with your development plans? He asked. I believe you mentioned building a port on the river here. There is that, Lady Zaradnik answered, but it's a minor concern. What's bothering me is, well, this giant hole in our history. We barely know anything about the past, yet we use past examples to inform our future actions. There's simply too much about the world that we don't know or understand. He couldn't deny that, but, at the same time, he wondered if it mattered all that much. Whenever ancient ruins were found, the first things that came to people's minds were undiscovered riches and powerful artifacts. Now that he thought about it, very little, if any, history was associated with such discoveries. Nobles put great value in history, so he had always assumed that any findings were inconvenient or outright damaging to the houses that found ruins on their lands. It was a perfectly rational decision. Few houses had histories that preceded the demon gods, so chances were that the history discovered in any ancient ruins would say that the land belonged to someone else. Ultimately, ruins were stores of practical rather than historical value. Eastern Temple first. Let's try not to get the whole thing at once. A single ranger stepped forward and knocked an arrow to his bowstring. His attack shattered the skull of an acolyte standing on one side of the temple entrance. Rangobat tried to imagine how imperial citizens would react if members of the clergy were casually assassinated in broad daylight like that. A sentry wouldn't be able to react in time to do anything unless they happened to be right beside the attacker. A second arrow destroyed the skeleton mage opposite the first. Several undead of various types came out the door and met a similar fate. Only a handful of wights made it to the expedition's defensive lines. Keep them coming. I know I said to not get them all at once, but let's not leave our people standing around. You are. What's that thing? We got the High Priest. The High Priest had been previously identified as a potential vampire spawn. Upon examining it up close, Rangobat couldn't blame the scouts for the tenuous label. The undead goblin that looked 3 times more savage than the other undead it was outrunning, but it was hard to tell exactly what type of undead it was. Who's catching this thing? I got it. A woman, he believed her name was Kyla, intercepted the slavering goblin mid-leap with her shield. Rather than bouncing away, it clung to her shield with its blackened claws. Why did I volunteer for this? Kyla cried as she tried to shake the thing off. Hello? We're adventurers from the Sorceress Kingdom. After dealing with their respective targets, the adventurers watched expectantly as Kyla struggled with the undead goblin. If you can understand what I'm saying, arg, this sucks. Why are we trying to talk to things that just want to kill us? Shouldn't there be some easier way? There are spells to control undead, Themis said. Alternatively, we can have an elder lich come along to dominate undead. I think that might defeat the purpose of the exercise, though. Go ahead and destroy it. It's probably a great white. Kyla dispatched the great white and gave its crumbling corpse a kick. We need to bring Mary next time, she grumbled. She's the undead specialist, isn't she? She didn't come precisely because we need more than just one undead specialized ranger, Lady Zaradnik said. If we left things to chance, our rangers would tend to specialize in beasts and demi-humans. It's not so easy to pick up, though. We're just getting a taste for the real thing to see if anyone likes it. The adventurers entered the temple ruins, spreading out to investigate its interior. Its roof had caved in and all of its wooden structure had rotted away, but at least the walls were partially intact. Lady Zaradnik stopped at the base of a shattered dais. Rangobat traced her line of sight to the missing section of wall behind it. Did you expect to find something? He asked. In a way, Lady Zaradnik replied. The layout of this place isn't exactly the same as human temples, but the architects faced similar realities. They needed space for their congregation and a place to address them from. Unlike the roughly rectangular temples that humans built, the one they were standing in was a shallow, half-circular auditorium. The ruins of some offices or dormitories lay behind the missing wall, but the wall itself would be. You are looking for a god, Rangobat said. A statue or a depiction on the wall behind the pulpit? No, the Baroness replied, I'm digesting the fact that it's missing. Lady Zaradnik turned away from the gaping hole, gesturing to the walls encircling the auditorium. They, too, had missing sections. If this was a human temple, she asked, what would go into those holes? Rangobat frowned at the spaces. He felt that something should be there, but what it was escaped him. Murals, Dimir said. Murals, the Baroness nodded. Carvings. Stained glass windows. We've determined that there are 2 main types of temples in this region of the world. There are altars to the elements where people make offerings to natural spirits and receive temple services, and then there are the temples that we're more familiar with, facilities of an organized religion or philosophy. An altar to a force of nature doesn't need seating like this because the priesthood doesn't preach. Either way, both would have murals, carvings, and other forms of artwork that would help identify what the temple was, who frequented it, and what their values and history were like. He frowned as he tried to envision what was missing. It was quite annoying when framed in Lady Zaradnik's terms. He almost felt like he was being denied information by some unknown antagonist. Art is valuable, Dimir said. Whoever wrecked the place may have just stolen it all. That might be the case for statues, pottery, and pieces of metalwork, Rangobat said, but entire walls? Maybe if the walls were inlaid with gold and encrusted with gems. Rangobat went to the closest standing stretch of wall. The grey stone didn't show any signs of being stripped of valuable materials, and the distinctly plain surface suggested that the temple's builders weren't particularly concerned about decorating the place. As with such structures in the Empire, artists were probably commissioned separately for that sort of work. So you're suggesting that this is one of the holes in the region's history that you've mentioned before, Lady Waldenstein said. My grandmother kept me out of that discussion when you visited with her, so I can only believe that this erasing of history is a purposeful act by powers that are still active in the present day. It's consistent with what I've observed elsewhere. Lady Zaradnik nodded. The distant past is something we barely have any knowledge of, and someone is trying to keep us ignorant of it. It's an injustice that must be corrected. Now that they were standing in the ruins of a temple, the main source of Lady Zaradnik's interest in the region's lost history was suddenly made apparent. She was a staunch adherent of a god of justice. Naturally, she wouldn't suffer any injustice if she could help it. In hindsight, it also explained much about what they had seen in her domain. Religion factored little into imperial rule, and Rangobart wasn't very religious himself, so the idea that religious tenets influenced Lady Zaradnik's work as a noble was outside his usual scope of consideration. Anyone find anything interesting? A chorus of negatives sounded from the surrounding adventurers. Using the ruined temple as their new stronghold, they prepared to clear what was left of the town. The town hall is next. None of our fighters should have issues holding off the mare. Remember to disable its regeneration once its turn to go down comes around. With their clearing routine already well established, Lady Zaradnik's touch was light as the adventurer's captain. It felt a bit like a routine highway patrol in the Empire, at least if the average Imperial Knight was as strong as the expedition's members. Lady Waldenstein and Dimir hovered ever closer to the action, their classically Imperial taste for spectating violence slowly, but surely, getting the better of them. He hoped that they wouldn't start displaying their bloodthirst like members of an excited audience at the Grand Arena. If you don't mind my asking, Lady Zaradnik, how much does it take to train individuals of this caliber? How much? Lady Zaradnik put on a thoughtful look. I suppose the better answer to your question is that how you can train your people is based on the means that you have available. Many methods used by the Sorceress Kingdom cannot be emulated by the Empire because it requires talent and infrastructure that the Empire hasn't developed yet. But these adventurers are locals, right? That means the training itself isn't so advanced that it can't be understood. Yes and no, the Baroness replied. It's just how things are, isn't it? The Imperial Army is a complex machine that allows the Empire to maintain a standing army of over 60,000 strong. Riestais may have faced the Imperial Army every year in the Katza Plains, but there is no realistic way that they could create their own version of the Imperial Knights. The closest they could get was Marquis Bollope's highly trained force of knights and professional men-at-arms. They have no Ministry of Magic to produce war wizards with, no Imperial Air Service, no military academy to produce career officers, and no militant clerics. The bureaucratic and logistical apparatus that supports the functions of the Imperial Army simply does not exist in Riestais, and so recreating the Imperial Army is similarly impossible. Rangobart nodded along as Lady Zaradnik spoke. It was the truth, but a dissatisfying one in respect to his question. Are you worried about your new company? The Baroness asked. How could I not be? He snorted. I'm starting from basically nothing. I had hoped that our visit to the Sorceress Kingdom would offer some avenues to explore, but, so far, it seems like it amounts to we have all these advantages that allow us to do what you can't. It's unfortunate that you've interpreted things that way. I was hoping that your time in the Sorceress Kingdom would send you home with all sorts of useful ideas. When it comes to industrial development, yes. I was just thinking that the Sorceress Kingdom would have more, well, magic. As far as perceptions of the Sorceress Kingdom went, this was far overshadowed by it being a kingdom of darkness, but it felt like an obvious attribution. It was right in the name of the place, after all. Wagner agonizes over that every day. The corner of the Baroness' lip twitched. The fact of the matter is that the Duchy of Eranthal was, until recently, part of the Kingdom of Riestais. It will take us generations to look and feel anything like a Sorceress Kingdom. Warden's Vale seems to be coming along well enough, Rangobart noted. That's because a series of unfortunate events that I can't be pleased about allowed me to start from scratch. I have a liege who appreciates my qualities and friends who are experts in the fields that I'm weak in. Old laws graciously retained by our new sovereign allow me to expand my territory without limit, and the majority of the royal court's most prominent members support me in my ventures. In Warden's Vale, I have power, land, resources, and freedom that any noble would be envious of. I am under no illusion that another noble could achieve an even greater degree of success in the same circumstances, though the direction of things would almost certainly be different. Of that, he had no doubt. From what he learned in Calling Castle, most of the other nobles in the Sorceress Kingdom displayed a close, if not identical, frame of thought to that of their imperial counterparts. Lady Zaradnik's influence on the work of her friends could be construed as either wasteful luxury or gross inefficiency. If she were a noble in the Empire, she would have been branded as incompetent, though she would have never had the chance to do the same as what she did in the Sorceress Kingdom. The ground shook lightly as the mare thumped its way out of the town hall and cut across the plaza to reach the adventurers. It took a ponderous overhead swing that might have instantly crushed a veteran Imperial knight, but Henrich received the blow against his shield with nonchalant ease. I think this blood meat Hulk is weaker than the ones we train against, the fighter said. Great, then you can hang on to it until we're done with the rest. TCH, I need to buy a fire-enchanted weapon from somewhere. Henrich obligingly brought his blood meat Hulk away from the main battle so its sweeping attacks wouldn't inconvenience the others. The fighter focused entirely on defense as his opponent's regeneration would make offense a pointless effort. Have you considered that you might be looking too far ahead? Lady Zaradnik asked. Rangobat turned his attention back to the Baroness. What do you mean by that? You've been tasked to create something that the Empire has never had before, Lady Zaradnik said. Both the Court Council and, more importantly, the Imperial Army look to you as an officer with the expertise necessary to deliver what they want. The reality, however, is that your career as an officer has been expedited due to Army traditions, and it's only been about a year since you entered service. While I may not be an officer in the Imperial Army, I do believe that you found yourself in a position similar to my own as an officer in the Royal Army of the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Forgive me for my ignorance, my lady, Rangobat said, but I'm not exactly sure what your position in the Royal Army of the Sorcerer's Kingdom even is. Before coming to the Sorcerer's Kingdom, he only knew her as a liaison officer. After visiting Warden's Vale, her place in the grand scheme of things was clouded by the variety of things that she was responsible for. On the field, Lady Zaradnik said, I'm a captain. What I'm referring to in this case is the fact that we're both responsible for raising special forces for our respective militaries. That part of the tour begins tomorrow, but I will say that your work should become much easier once you start setting expectations on your own terms. Pursuing the nebulous desires of your superiors who have no real idea of what you're supposed to be doing probably isn't very productive, and you will be held entirely responsible for not meeting expectations which you haven't set boundaries for. Is this something you've experienced before? My superiors have a habit of both overestimating and underestimating things at the same time. Fortunately, improving themselves and the organizations that they are responsible for to better serve His Majesty the Sorcerer King lies foremost on their minds at all times. I cannot say whether the Empire will provide you with the same experience. Rangobat snorted. Most likely not. Even when they agreed on something, the different factions of the Empire all wanted things to go their way. Lady Waldenstein saw the War Wizards as a cultural pillar in the magocratic society she envisioned for the Empire's future. The Imperial Army wanted a unit that could facilitate new operations, especially with the coming expansionary drive. Efficiency was ever the mandate of the Imperial administration, and the War Wizard Company was a way to optimize the Empire's human resources. He wasn't sure he wanted to know what his new subordinates would expect. As for himself, his conversation with the Baroness made him realize that he didn't have any expectations of his own. All of the legwork he had done so far was in service to the desires of others. His life since childhood followed similar patterns, so maybe it was just a frame of mind that he was accustomed to slipping into. Zaradnik, can we do this keep/barracks thing next? I wanted to save it for last, but not for any real reason. If we're going to find something, a rogue named Mag said, it's going to be there. It has the strongest packs of undead and the inner structure is still intact. A good half of the adventurers turned pleading looks up at the Baroness. Rather than their captain, she now felt more like their mother. Fine, Lady Zaradnik said. Have we noticed anything new in there? If we clear out the entrance, Mag said, us rogues can take a peek deeper inside. You heard her. We're picking off the sentries at the front. Expect them to bring friends. In addition to the 2 skeleton warriors guarding the entrance to the half-ruined building, 6 more came from just inside the doorway. The undead squad was powerful enough that a standard imperial patrol would avoid engaging it and call for an airstrike instead. Alessia, grab 3. Destroy them first. The adventurers smoothly reorganized themselves to carry out the Baroness' orders. Lady Zaradnik didn't spare the battle anything more than the occasional glance, instead peering up at the skies over the plaza. Do you think we'll be attacked by wyvern riders again? Rangobart asked. I've yet to figure out that aspect of this location's logic, Baroness Zaradnik replied. But the patrol back there called for air cavalry. It's not unreasonable for the town's stronghold to do the same. What if they are being coordinated by an unseen elder lich? That's part of the reason why we're attacking this building now. We've been clearing the town methodically. Abruptly switching to the end may cause an unseen controller to panic or at least throw off their preparations. Can the undead panic? Of course, Lady Zaradnik replied. The difference is that they can separate themselves from the physiological consequences of it. Rangobart eyed the stronghold and its sentries. Aside from the ones that had been attacked, it didn't look like any of them had moved from their posts. Lady Zaradnik dispatched her scouts halfway through the ongoing battle. They returned not long after the last skeleton warrior fell. More skeleton warriors, Itzal reported. The insides unnaturally clean. The adventurer turned their heads at the rogue's report. How clean? Lady Zaradnik asked. It might be from that goblin army looting the place. Looks like someone had the corridors swept a while ago, the rogue replied. As in with a broom. No sign of any furnishings or decorations and it hasn't been ransacked. How far were you able to get? Just to the ends of the corridors. More undead are blocking the way beyond that. Does that mean someone's home? Kylo asked. It's worth a summon to find out. Lady Zaradnik gave Themis a nod. The cleric held her palms out toward a clear spot nearby. Summon undead eye. Rangobart frowned as a skeleton rose in front of them. He wasn't sure whether he should be shocked that a cleric had summoned an undead being or whether it should have been expected for an adherent of Sursana. The adventurers said nothing, watching expectantly as the skeleton walked into the empty doorway and turned the corner. Nothing's happening to it, Themis said. Does that mean no one's inside? Or they could be smart enough to see what we're doing. Attack something with it. Okie. A crunch heralded the summon's demise, followed by the tread of skeletal feet and a variety of angry noises. Among them was a thin, eerie wail. Wraith. Keep an eye out for it. Undead appeared a moment later, flowing out of the entrance to head straight for Themis. It's weird how they always know who the summon belonged to, Henrich said. Wraith coming through the pack, Poole called out. 3 of them. Aside from the 3 wraiths, there were over a dozen skeleton warriors and scores of lesser undead. Still near the front, Lady Waldenstein and Dimmeir took an involuntary step back. Burn them down. Double barrage. Grease. 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 As with their attack on the gatehouse, the swarm of advancing undead piled up as they stumbled and slowed on the magical oil slick. The expedition's mages unleashed 2 sets of fireballs from their positions atop the overgrown temple walls. An orange glare lit the surroundings as the resulting conflagration scoured the broken stones of the plaza. By the time the flames subsided, only a few skeleton warriors in the rear fringes survived. They continued charging forward through the remains of their fellows, crushing charred corpses and kicking up piles of ash. It doesn't seem like anyone's home, Lady Zaradnik said. What makes you say that? Rangobart asked. If they were under the control of an elder lich, they wouldn't have reacted like that. The Elder Lich would have taken some time to digest what was going on before issuing orders to its dominated undead. What if it was having its dominated undead act as if they were mindless? Then it would be throwing away its army. There is a possibility that it did so to distract us while it escaped, but the Royal Army has orders to intercept unauthorized flyers outside of the expedition area. Let's take a look at our prize, shall we? Our prize? Out in the plaza, the adventurers had already dispatched the remaining undead. The scouts had already left to investigate the building again. Howe signaled to the expedition from the front entrance. There's an intact basement, the rogue said as they came up to him. The others are already poking around down there. Is it cleared of undead? Lady Zaradnik asked. The basement isn't too big, Howe answered. About what you'd expect for a building this size. Lady Zaradnik nodded to Alessia, who led a vanguard down a set of narrow stone steps. Her voice drifted up the stairwell, sounding the all clear, and the rest of the group joined them in a well-kept chamber lined with small rooms. Furniture that looked like it was hewn from the nearby mountains was arranged in an eerily similar manner to a laboratory at the Imperial Ministry of Magic. As time passed, the adventurers' excited expressions faded into disappointment. While neatly furnished, furnishings appeared to be all that the underground space had to offer. Themis came around to deliver her final report 30 minutes after their entrance. I think it's obvious by now, the cleric said, but someone used to live here. Probably an elder lich, going by the look of things. They've either moved away long ago or they were destroyed and the place looted by the goblin army last year. I see, Lady Zaradnik said. That's disappointing for us, but, even as empty as it is, this town is still a valuable site for our researchers. Will they even be able to work here? Alessia asked. Given how quickly the undead reappeared after being wiped out last year, new ones may show their faces at any moment. That's something I'll have to figure out for the next expedition group, Lady Zaradnik answered. The cleric and the paladin gave Lady Zaradnik a questioning look. The Baroness offered them a slight smile. The Adventurer Guild has a new commission, she told them. Let's head back to Warden's Vale, we can discuss the details over dinner.